Did you know that Filipinos often speak different languages depending on their social class? Well, actually, this phenomenon isn't confined to the Philippines. It's quite universal. Let's talk about it. First, let me tell you the brief history of the Philippines. The modern history of the Philippines is basically the story of one country being shaped by multiple empires. For more than 300 years, the Philippines was ruled by Spain. That's why so many Filipinos have Spanish names, and that's why Catholicism is everywhere, and why the culture feels very different from most of Asia. But in 1898, after the Spanish-American War, Spain lost the Philippines to the United States. And honestly, this is where modern Filipino society really started to change. The Americans built public schools, introduced English education, and pushed American-style politics and culture into the country. For decades, English became associated with education, success, and higher social status. Then, during World War II, Japan invaded the Philippines. The war was brutal, and hundreds of thousands of Filipinos died during the occupation. After the war, in 1946, the Philippines finally became fully independent. This is an abbreviated version of the history of the Philippines. But you may wonder why I brought this up while talking about the Filipino language, because the two are tightly intertwined. As I told you in the intro, most Filipinos in the upper class tend to use English, while many others use Tagalog. Now, Tagalog is the national language of the Philippines, but throughout the American colonial era, English became a symbol of social rank. Most private schools, international schools, and upper-class schools used English as their primary language. On the contrary, the lower the social status of a school, the more common it is to use languages other than English. The students who attended upper-class schools eventually gained influence over the economy and education of the entire nation. When they grew older and had children, those children naturally acquired fluent English from their parents. Power gave birth to power, and it goes on and on and on. There's a concept that helps explain this phenomenon in the Philippines. It's called linguistic capital. This concept was introduced by Pierre Bourdieu, a French sociologist. He argued that linguistic capital is a form of accumulated linguistic skill that can influence a person's position within society. In a word, the language you use can shape your social status. On the other hand, there is another concept called cultural capital, which is accumulated through education, knowledge, and cultural experiences. Since cultural capital is essentially a collection of knowledge and cultural assets, it can also help explain the phenomenon we just discussed in the Philippines. Let me show you just one more thing related to this topic. Take a look at this. This paper is called Periphery ELT From Myth to Reality About English in the Philippines by Isabel Pafianco Martin. In this paper, the author discusses how English in the Philippines became associated with education, economic success, and even higher social status. The paper suggests that English is the only cure to all economic ailments, and even English is the only language of knowledge. The author doesn't see these as objective truth, but rather as social perceptions shaped by the American colonial education system. In my opinion, it's basically rooted in human nature. We're talking about the Philippines, but it also applies to the whole world. Anyone who's attentive to social interactions can probably notice it in everyday life. It doesn't matter where you are, which country you live in, or what social class you belong to. While I was writing this script, it crossed my mind that we Koreans also desperately love to use English, French, or even Latin, which nobody speaks in daily life. It's just crazy. Everything including apartments and cars and etc. are all named after English or European language that 99.99% of Koreans never grasp. And still there are many complaints from senior citizens who couldn't possibly find where senior center is, even in front of a building with a sign that says senior center in English, which should be written as Gyeonglodang in Korean. It's getting crazier and crazier. Lastly, I remember a scene from the movie Django Unchained by Quentin Tarantino. Calvin Candy, who wanted to be called Monsieur Candy, was portrayed as both a hypocrite and a Francophile who didn't even know that Alexandre Dumas was black. The language itself is not the source of power. Rather, people give power to a language. Every day, all the people struggle to gain power over others. Please subscribe for more. Thank you.